Well, hello, everybody. It is good to have you here. I want to start today by welcoming our different campuses, whether you're hanging out with us in Kenosha or Racine. If you're watching online, we just want to say to all of you, hello, hello, hello. And to those in the room with me, it is good to have you here. So today, we are going to talk about escaping a relationship that has become monotonous, predictable, or boring. Now, I know people, especially who are in different seasons of life, who just want to tune out in different talks. And so if you're single or if you're dating, if you are dreaming someday of being married, but you're not in a relationship right now, or on the opposite extreme, if you have been married and you're like, no, that would be a nightmare to me, right? Been there, done that. I just want you to know, I understand it's going to be easy to check out. It's going to be easy for you to just step back and say, nope, not today. But I'm going to beg you to stay checked in. I'm going to beg you, if you're watching online, don't shut your computer, don't turn off your phone, because there's going to be some good things that we talk about. Not everything that we talk about today is going to be applicable, but a lot's going to be applicable to relationships. So 1991, there was a tiny town, still exists, of New Berlin in upstate New York, that had a nursing home, the Chase Manhattan Bank, Chase Memorial Nursing Home, and it was a place of despair. There were 87 elderly residents, many of them suffering from different things, but the vast majority of them had dementia, and so they were disconnected from their families and disconnected from their friends and from staff and just really from the outside world. Well, in 1991, a new doctor, Dr. Bill Thomas, came in, and he spent some time in the nursing home, and he diagnosed 3 problems that he called the 3 plagues of nursing home existence: boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. And Dr. Thomas determined that what the residents needed was not more protection from the outside world. He said what they need is more connection with each other. And so he met with the director of the nursing home, some of the leadership, some of the staff, and he said, let's put plants in every one of the residents' rooms so that it has life in there. And then it gives them something to water and something to pay attention to and something to just have time to do, right? And you got just a little bit of pushback because the expenses and whatnot, but they pretty quickly relented and said, okay, we'll do this. Well, he was just getting started. Next thing he does is he says, well, how about this? Let's bring a couple of dogs in. And then he said, and a couple of cats. Well, this is where the pushback really started. They said, well, legally, we don't know that we can do that. Who's going to, make sure that these things are taken care of and fed and cleaned and whatnot? But he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, after enough pushing, they relented. Well, then he said, well, how about this? Let's bring also a couple birds in. Because you know how you get up in the morning, you hear birds chirping outside? I think it would bring life to the nursing home. And they're thinking he's going to suggest 2 or 3 birds. He suggests 100 birds. They said, absolutely not. But he kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and finally they give in, and they said, okay, we will let 100 birds come in. Well, the birds ended up arriving before the cages. And so they have these 100 birds, and what they do is they clean out the hair salon there at the nursing home, and they let the birds go free. I mean, it's full-on pandemonium in this salon area with birds flying around. Well, the residents saw this, and they ended up watching through the window, putting their faces against the glass and talking with each other and laughing, and life started happening. And as Dr. Thomas kind of reflects back on that moment of bringing dogs and birds and cats, he says it was glorious chaos. Now, these pics that we have are older, so they're pixelated, but it gives you an idea of the connection that started happening. There's another doctor, Dr. Atul Gawande, who writes about this particular nursing home, and he says the effects on residents soon became impossible to ignore. The residents began to wake up and come to life. People we had believed weren't able to speak started speaking. People who had been completely withdrawn and only used wheelchairs to get around started coming to the nurse's station and saying, I'll take the dog for a walk. The mortality rate dropped by 15% from where they were at. The total drug cost ended up plummeting to less than half of what they were at a comparative facility. And so when researchers started studying the Chase Memorial Nursing Home, they said, as much as we study it, we can't totally pinpoint what's happening. Well, Dr. Thomas knew. He said people just need a reason to live in a sense of belonging. Now, that's just not true in nursing homes. That is true in every area of life. We need purpose, we need belonging, and we need community. 3,000 years ago, King Solomon of Israel writes a book in which he starts out by talking about how meaningless life can seem at times. Kansas City Chief fans know all about this right now. This is how they're feeling, right? It's a very depressing start to a book. But after talking about how meaningless life can feel, he changes his tone. Here's what he writes. He writes, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help, but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Now, when Solomon wrote those words, he was writing about relationships in general. He's talking about family and friends and coworkers. But nowhere is this more true than in a marriage relationship. They can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. So marriage is supposed to be a place of support and belonging and purpose. But unfortunately, when a lot of people talk about their relationship, they use terms that are very similar to the ones Dr. Thomas used when talking about the nursing home plagues, right? Boredom and loneliness and helplessness. I'm gonna readjust this TV for a second, right? Boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. Now, of course, no relationship ever starts out like this, right? Every relationship starts out fun. So when you're new in a relationship, you're flirting through texting back and forth, woo, 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 woo. Or you're getting online and you're going through their social media and you're looking at their profile pics and all the things they got. And you're just like, oh man, they're adorable, look at that. Now for me, when I was in middle school, we didn't have social media, right? When I was in middle school, we didn't have the texting back and forth. So I had to resort to what so many of my friends had to resort to, and that was letter writing. And we were the masters of letter writing. Man, we would just sit out there and we'd just be Shakespeare and all the things they were writing. And then we would take that letter and we would fold it up so tiny. You remember this? And it was like a little swan tail, and you pull that tail and it unfolds, and there's like six or 7 pages back and front, revealing and expressing our feelings. Just awesome. But here's the deal. Over time, the initial excitement of the relationship starts to fade, and then the relationship starts to drift. And here's the deal. It doesn't matter how long you've been in a relationship or how much you love each other, the greatest threat to every long-term relationship is this little word called drift. Drift is what happens when the stress of life and the busyness of our schedules and the monotony of the routines we go through on a daily basis slowly carry us in a direction we never intended to go. And the reason drift is so common is because it requires no effort. You don't have to be intentional. You don't have to work at it. It just happens. And unfortunately, we don't notice that it's happening until usually it's too late. And then we feel this huge disconnection with the other person. We feel isolated. We feel separated. And almost every long-term relationship goes through this. I mean, this is a universal problem. It's the reason why the great theologian, Chris Rock, says this. He says, you can be married and bored or single and lonely. Ain't no happiness nowhere. Wow, that's encouraging. Right? You could be married and bored or single and lonely. And comedians mock this stuff all the time. And when you mock something, it's usually because there's an element of truth in it. Right? That's why we say the old ball and chain. That's why when someone's gonna get married, you're like, it's a life sentence, and we try to laugh it off and act like, it's one big joke. But I hope you know this. God did not create marriage to be a place of boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons God created marriage was to help combat those things. Think about this. When we read the creation story in the book of Genesis, there is a rhythm to it, right? So God creates light and he says, it is good. And then God creates land and he creates seas and he puts boundaries around the seas and he says, it is good. And then God creates plants and he creates trees and fruits and vegetables and he says, it's good. It's good, it's good, it's good. He creates animals of all different kinds, right? And he says, it is good. But then God creates a human being. God creates man, and there is this mood change that happens in the story. Something isn't quite right. Immediately after the creation of man, here's what we read. Then the Lord God said, it is not good. What's not good? It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him. Now, the Hebrew word for helper is not a derogatory or inferior term. Matter of fact, in the Jewish scriptures, the same term is used multiple times for describing the character of God. God is a helper. So in a relationship, we are equals. In a relationship, we are complements. We complement each other. We provide support and care and encouragement to each other. But if we don't pay attention to the marriage over time, without thinking about it, without working at it, we just start to drift. And relationship drift eventually leads to boredom, loneliness, and a feeling of helplessness. It leads to one of these three plagues. And so if that's where you're at today, if you'd say one of these plagues are taking over my relationship, you need to find a way to bring life to it. You need to find a way to bring energy and hope to it. You need to change the environment. Oh, does that mean I get to buy a pet dog? Right? A pet dog isn't gonna fix a relationship. A pet cat definitely won't fix a relationship. Bringing a baby, let's just bring a baby. That's not gonna fix a relationship. It's so much more than that. So I wanna talk about what it's gonna take to bring life into the relationship and change the environment. All right, I'm gonna give you, but before I do that, what I wanna do is just give you very quickly here some indicators, some signs that relationship drift could potentially be happening in your relationship, because it's not easy to see. And I'm just gonna warn you up front that today is gonna be like drinking from a fire hydrant. It's like, right? It's just coming at you. If you're a stenographer, you're gonna do really good. But if you're not a stenographer, you better be on caffeine today, because we're just gonna keep firing away some things, all right? So your relationship is drifting when one or both of you becomes a blamer in the relationship. So when you look at the other person, you point and you blame them for how your life has unfolded. You blame them for every problem in your marriage. You're constantly arguing about the same things over and over and over, and there's never a solution. There's a perpetual frustration with the other person. That is a red flag, that there is a distance that has been created, and you need to pay attention to it. Another sign of relationship drift is when either of you becomes an outsourcer. An outsourcer is someone who takes the most sacred elements and aspects of marriage and outsources them to another person or to other pursuits. In other words, what we should find in our partner: emotional support, deep friendship, unconditional acceptance, and sometimes even sex. We look to find that in another person, or we find it in a friendship, or a job, pornography. We look elsewhere. And so we may be living together, but we've become roommates. That is a huge red flag. Another sign of relationship drift, something you need to pay attention to, is when one of you becomes a parent first in your mentality. So instead of being a husband first or a wife first, you're a mom or dad first. And parenting is consuming the vast majority of your time. Now, to be fair, when our kids are little, this is just kind of part of the reality of life, right? They're going to take up some of our time. But here's the deal. If we don't learn early on to put up boundaries with our little gremlins, those gremlins grow up and they become monsters. And it's just like me, right? They just want to take over everything. They want all the attention. And then if they ever grow up enough to finally leave the house, God willing, what happens is you find that we don't just have empty nests here, we have empty hearts. And it is very, very common. And I was talking to my wife about that this week, and she was fine with me telling her this. This has been her biggest struggle in our marriage. She's doing really, really good now, but for many years, it was all about our kids. It's just like, my kids, my kids, just gotta be around my kids. And there's this obsession, and I know a lot of parents have this, a lot of moms especially. So your kid can do no wrong. I look at my kid, I'm like, just look at their face. They've got the biggest character flaw in the world. Just look at how guilty they look, right? And she's, oh, baby, when I see your face, right, there's not a thing that I would change because you're amazing, just the way you are, right? I was like, ugh. Now, to her credit, I mean, we went to many hours of therapy, which is why I have enough material to talk about, right? But she realized it, she dealt with it, and moved on, right? But you can be living together, operating as you can be giving way too much attention to the children, not to the relationship. But here's the thing. What my wife realized is the best thing we can do for the health and security of our kids is give each other attention, right? Here's number 4 is red flag is if one or both of you becomes a scorekeeper. This is when you keep track of every wrong and every hurt. And if you feel like you're behind, you're going to do whatever you can to get ahead. You're going to say what you will become a history buff. You will go back 5, 10, 25, 30 years, pull whatever you need to, bring it in the present, because you're going to win. You want to know how I know this? This is me. Oh man, this is me. I always want to win. The problem is, it's impossible to win without criticizing, blaming, or making my wife feel like a loser in some way. And then I win, but we're not any closer. We don't have more meaningful conversations. So I don't really win. One more sign that the relationship is drifting is when one or both of you becomes a separatist. Now, in some ways, this is like an outsourcer, right? A separatist is when you occupy the same home, but you have separate hopes, separate dreams, you're going in separate directions, often separate bank accounts, separate ways of approaching life, and eventually you end up living even in separate homes or separate rooms just because you have separate lives. Now, this is not what God intended. God intended that in our marriage, we become one. He intended that we are companions and we are partners and we are teammates. It's the reason why the one-sentence summary of marriage that is repeated over and over and over throughout the scriptures is this: a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. You and your husband are one. You and your wife, you're one. When one of you loses, the other loses. When one of you wins, the other wins. The goal of marriage is to become one physically, emotionally, socially, relationally, and spiritually. Now, this doesn't mean we don't have any independence, and it doesn't mean we don't have freedom as individuals. It doesn't mean that we're incomplete without the other person, but it does mean we've made a very intentional decision that I'm gonna merge who I am, everything that I have in my past, everything that I have in my present, everything that I'm gonna be someday, and they're gonna take everything they've had in their past, their present, who they hope to be someday, and we're gonna merge our lives together. And we're gonna become one, and it is so romantic, right? This is why we have Valentine's Day, and it's why we have romantic movies and love songs. 1, you're like a dream come true. 2, just wanna be with you. 3, it's plain to see you're the only one for me. 4, oh man, repeat steps 1 through 3. You guys are not a romantic group of people, man. Right? 5, you make me want to make you fall in love with me. Becoming one is a romantic concept, but here's the deal. It is a very mysterious concept. And it's the reason why immediately after the Apostle Paul summarizes marriage by saying a man leaves father and mother and is joined to his wife, they become one, he writes this. He adds his own commentary. He says, this is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. Translation: even though the Almighty and all-powerful God of the universe does not need us, because of his love, because of his humility, God willingly enters into a relationship with us in a way that marks and changes our identity and his identity. We are connected to each other. Now, God is still God, but his identity is marked by his followers because we reflect him on this planet. Now, to be clear, this is not like Voltron, right? Where each robot gives up their individual identity and they form a completely new being. We are distinct individuals, but our identity is forever marked and changed because of our relationship with each other. And so the big question is this: how do we do that? How do we become one? How do we create a life-giving environment in our relationship that helps us stay connected? That's what we're gonna take the rest of the time we have together to talk about. And I'm gonna talk quickly like I have been, all right? How to connect in a relationship? Let's start by talking about physical connection, right? To connect physically requires touch. And I purposely started with this one just because I want you to pay attention, right? It requires touch, it's just obvious. It's about showing affection. It includes hand-holding and cuddling and hugging and kissing and Netflix and chill. It includes it all, right? Touch is powerful, because it communicates acceptance and it communicates love to the other person. It says, I want you, I'm attracted to you. And as a husband and wife, physical touch is something that you should have exclusively with each other. Right? This is yours and yours alone. I'm not gonna be holding hands with another woman. I'm not gonna be cuddling with another woman. This is for my wife and I, between ourselves. It's why the Apostle Paul writes to married couples a couple thousand years ago, and he says this: do not deprive each other of sexual relations. Now, when Paul writes this, right, he's not saying, husbands or wives, you can never say no, right? What do you mean you said no? Did you just reject me? Hashtag 1 Corinthians 7:4, don't say no. Right? It doesn't mean that you have to go along every time. It just means don't go too long without a physical connection because the hormones start getting out of control, temptation starts taking over, right? And if this is an area that's been very hard for you to prioritize, maybe you got young kids around the house, maybe you're just tired all the time, maybe it's a health issue, my challenge is create an environment for physical connection to happen. You can do that, right? They figured out how to do it on The Bachelor, right? Oh, they find these ways. We create these romantic moods. We got the fire going, the lighting and music. Oh man, it is so romantic. I could fall in love with a cardboard box in that type of setting. It'd be like, oh, I'm just wiping drool. Look at that box, man. Look at the smile they put on that thing, right? But here's the deal. You don't have to do mood lighting. You don't have to put music in the background. You can create a mood simply by the way you talk and interact with each other throughout the day, but you have to be intentional. And I don't even like talking about this because I know some people get triggered, and so I'm not trying to trigger you. But do you know when people have affairs? They schedule those affairs, right? They plan them. They have to figure out, hey, how are we going to find the time to hook up? Where are we going to hook up? Why not take the same energy and the same kind of devotion and focus and plan things for the marriage so that you end up with way less regret? Next one is emotional connection, right? To connect emotionally requires fun. Anyone in a long-term relationship is going to want to have a deep connection and an emotional bond with the other person. Now, emotion's always part of a relationship if there's love there, right? Good and bad. So obviously this is a good type of emotion. I mean, think about just emotions, right? There's moments where you look at him and you're like, dear God, I feel like I won the lottery. This is amazing. I'm so grateful for you. But it could be a couple days later and there's another moment, right? And it's like, dear Jesus, if you choose to take him right now, I'm totally okay with that. Make it quick and painless. Send me someone else with a little bit more money. But Lord, I am fine. Take him now, right? Love is all types of emotions. But initially, it's easy to feel the emotional connection because we're obsessed with each other. We stalk each other, right? It's like, oh man, every breath you take. Oh, come on. Every move you make. Every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. You got that right? But researchers say that the average lifespan of that in-love emotion and obsession lasts 2 years, give or take a little bit. 2 years. So it's not realistic to think, oh, we're always gonna be on this emotional high. It's like, oh, I love you. We'd never get anything done. But the truth is, we can create environments by the way we talk and treat each other for those emotions to surface. And it happens by being intentional to have fun and creating memories together. Date nights, getaways, taking walks together. And when your kids are young, date nights aren't always practical. Getaways aren't always possible. It might be finding shows to watch together. But it's being intentional to say, we're gonna create memories together, we're gonna create a bond together. And when we do things together, we enhance our sense of closeness. This is why King Solomon of Israel writes, a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit saps a person's strength. I've met with many, many people over the 20-some years I've been a pastor whose strength has been sapped. And if this isn't something that's currently happening in your relationship, you can fix it. It's actually not that hard. Just get out a calendar, put some dates on the calendar and say, we're gonna do something on these dates. Or just get out a piece of paper and say, we're gonna create a bucket list, but we're gonna do something to create fun and bring memories into our relationship. Next one is social connection. To connect socially requires friends, which is gonna be a problem for some of you. Right? To connect socially requires friends. One of the best things you can do for your marriage is to have couple friends that you connect with regularly. Now, we all need friends apart from couple friends, right? I need friends that I hang out with. My wife needs friends that she can hang out with. But when my wife and I spend time with our couple friends, we get to invest in our marriage and our friendships at the very same time. And there's a unique bond that's formed because this is something we're building together. We're building a relationship with this other couple. Now, just a side note, little pro tip for you guys. Only hang out with couples where you know you are a notch or two above the other guy. Because you don't want to be driving home and your wife being, I wish you were more like him. I wish you were more funny like him. So I'm very intentional with the couple friends that I hang out with I'm like, I got him beat. No worries, right? Next one is relational connection. There needs to be a relational. To connect relationally requires transparency. This is when we really get to know the other person. We start being vulnerable and we start opening up. We talk about maybe insecurities or fears. It's when there's trust in a relationship that I can share this and know it's not gonna get repeated everywhere. The flip side of relational connection, it's not anger, it's not resentment, it's not fighting all the time, it's just indifference. And it's where a lot of couples end up. And if you talk to them about the relationship, they say, oh, it exists, it's there. And so if you want to evaluate right now whether or not you're drifting in this area, just ask, when's the last time we had a meaningful conversation? When's the last time we had a serious conversation that wasn't a fight? When's the last time we sat down and we talked about our hopes and dreams and we connected with each other in a very real way? You know, in the first century, in one of the Apostle Paul's many, many writings that we looked at many of them already today, he says, don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. When's the last time you can genuinely and sincerely say, I did this with my husband or wife? Is this a rhythm in your life? To just say, I'm taking an interest in them too. See, when you move to a new area, and or let's just say you're even visiting a new area, you just pull out your phone, you pull out your map app, and you're looking for what can I do? Where are the restaurants? What do they got for grocery stores? All of that stuff, right? You're studying the area. And you do that for a while, but eventually you start to know the area because you've lived there for a while. Or if you've taken enough vacation to an area, you're like, I know this area pretty well, so you don't need your phone as much. Well, in a relationship, the same thing is true. We start dating, and it's like, when's your birthday? Okay, what school did you go to? Okay, great. What's your favorite color? What do you like to eat? And you're asking all these questions, and it's like, man, it's like, oh, everything's new. But eventually, you put the phone down. You know them. And then you just don't think about it much more anymore. The problem is if you moved away from an area for 10 years and it's a progressive area, you come back and there's a lot of new things happening. And life changes. Our bodies change, our environments change, right? Nothing in the world is static. Things are always changing. And over the last year, 2 years, 5 years, your partner's changed. So what's their favorite hobby? What's their favorite restaurant? What's something they're currently stressed out about besides you? What's their favorite vacation spot? If they could go anywhere in the world, what makes your partner feel most loved and most appreciated? The bottom line is we need to be students of our spouse. And it's not gonna shock you that the deeper bond we have relationally with each other, the more prepared we will be for stressful events and for conflict. Not that stress won't be there, not that conflict won't be there, but when they happen, we have a teammate, we have a partner. And even when we're arguing with each other, we're not there to win the argument, we're there to solve the conflict. Now, for some of us, this is a big challenge, right? Because based on our personality or background or temperament or whatever, it's just hard to open up. It's hard to have that emotional connection. And you can't help how God made you, but you can work at getting better and better. And if you're like, oh, I don't know how to connect to relation, I'm a little lost, Google search, date night questions, married couple questions, and it will give you something to talk about. I brought my son out to eat recently, and we're hanging out, and he's talking, and he says, Dad, you know why I keep talking? I said, no. He goes, because you don't talk. I'm like, oh, I'm really embarrassed. I need to get better at this, right? And then I started engaging in conversations. Sometimes we just have to be called out in a loving and kind way. Number 5 is a spiritual connection. To connect spiritually requires a shared faith. Now, the truth is everything we do in life is spiritual. Everything we do is a spiritual issue. How we handle money, how we interact with people, how we deal with conflict, all that stuff's spiritual. But I give it its own category because I know this is the way a lot of us think. Spiritual closeness is about having a shared faith and finding ways to connect with God as a couple. So that might be showing up to in-person services or watching online and then talking and discussing what was talked about, right? It might be learning to pray together. That's intimidating. It might be joining a group together. It might be reading a devotional together. But here's the deal. What we believe about God impacts so much about our life, which is why spiritual connection matters. Now, if you're married to someone who is kind of indifferent to faith, or maybe they're even anti-God, I can't pretend that I can understand what it's like to be in that relationship. All I can say is just do your best to live a life of godliness in front of your husband or wife and just keep the course. Just stay faithful. What I want you to hear today is if your relationships become boring or lonely or you're feeling helpless, you can create an environment that brings life into the relationship and helps you become one physically, emotionally, socially, relationally, or spiritually. And I know tons of people who work really hard to do that, and they're saying, Dave, it's frustrating because I'm trying to make that happen, but it's just not happening. And this isn't the only answer to that dilemma, but this is one of the biggest answers, and that's this. There is a proper order to them, and often we get them out of order. And so if you're single or dating, or you want to date someday, you need to really pay attention to what I'm about to say, because the proper order to doing relationships is the exact opposite of how we just talked about them. You want a healthy relationship? It starts by building a foundation and connecting spiritually from the very beginning. And to say, God, right from the beginning, we surrender our relationship to you, right? Because what we think about God affects everything in our life. And I better know. Man, it affects how I handle money, how I handle conflict, right? We talked about that stuff. And right from the beginning, it should just be obvious. We're on the same page here. The next step is connecting relationally. Now, we don't have to be like, oh, I'm talking to a therapist and I'm telling them every life problem. That's unhealthy. But right from the beginning, we should be studying personality and temperament and saying, how do they interact with people? How do they respond to people? It's easier to notice red flags in the beginning than it is many, many months into the relationship. And then after we connect relationally, we start connecting socially. This is when I start bringing friends and family into the situation, right? I see how they interact with their family. I realize, okay, half of these people look like they were serial killers at one time, but right, it's red flags. But it may also be, man, would be a huge blessing to continue to build a relationship with this person because of their family. Next step would be connecting emotionally. Now, obviously, we should be having fun throughout the entire relationship process, but this is when we start being really intentional about like, man, I'm building great memories, and there's depth happening to the relationship, right? Because if you're building these deep, meaningful memories, right, with someone that you've known for 4 weeks, it's dumb. That's just irresponsible. There is an order to these things. And then eventually, after marriage, right, we connect physically. And I'm not talking about hand holding and hugging and cuddling, right? I'm boom, chicka, wow, wow, that's what I'm talking about, right? And so here's the deal. When you get these things out of order, you're setting yourself up for problems. You're setting yourself up for difficulty. But that's how most people do relationships. They do it upside down. They do it the exact opposite of how it should be done. And then they wonder, well, why when the wind of stress, when the wind of difficulty, when it blows, why does it just seem like our relationship is so rocky? Why are things falling apart? Why are things moving? Well, too many people, they get married and they don't really know the other person. They start with physical connection and they realize, they wonder, why is there no depth here? You don't need me to tell you this. I mean, come on, based on what we've seen in our culture and based on what some of you would say, hey, you personally experience, the normal way of doing relationships isn't working. But I promise you can escape boredom and loneliness. You can escape this feeling of helplessness in a relationship, but you have to create an environment for connection. Whatever your vision, whatever your dream for your relationship, for your marriages, I promise you God's dream is bigger. I promise you it's bigger. God wants for marriage to be a safe place where we're fully known and fully loved. Marriage is a lifelong, monogamous relationship intended to reflect God's love for us, to refine our character, to create stability for children, and to unite us as one with another person. That's God's dream for you. And I know we're broken, and I know not every relationship turns out happily ever after. But wherever we're at, whatever season we're in, let's just say, I'm gonna do my best in this relationship, and if I'm not in a relationship, my next relationship, this is what I'm gonna go after. And it won't happen overnight. That's why Paul starts his letter starts 1 Corinthians 13 by saying, love is patient. It's patient, it takes time. It's a process, but it can happen. Let's pay attention to our relationships so we do not drift. Because drift leads to boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. And that's not what God intends. If you're there, you can escape it, but it takes work. Let me pray for you. Our Heavenly Father, I pray regardless of where we're at today in relationships, that you would help us to reflect you in our relationships. Help us to have the patience and the kindness and the faithfulness and the goodness that you show to us, help us to reflect that in our different relationships, friend relationship, family relationship, coworkers, but especially in our marriage relationships. Help us to go the distance. Where there is brokenness today, where there's hurt and pain today, I pray bring healing by the power of your Holy Spirit in Jesus' name. Amen.